There is no secret right now that the MCU is in some deep crap. Audience trust and attention have never been lower. Box office numbers are declining, and the once beloved movie franchise now has fans saying, yeah, I'm not quite sure if I'm gonna go see that film. Maybe I'll watch it on Disney Plus instead. And then just a couple months ago, there were talks about the MCU getting a reboot after the Multiverse Saga ends. And we're here to say, no, I think it's actually a very bad idea. And what I think that they actually should do is that they should continue the Multiverse Saga in the MCU. And we're going to talk about why here in this video. But of course, if it's your first time here, welcome to Keepin It Comic. I'm your host, GoofyRhexxi. Now, we made a video a couple months ago where we discussed and talked about the problems in the MCU and how to fix them, particularly problems involving the vast amount of characters that they've been introducing here since Endgame, and really how it's been challenging to incorporate all those characters in a proper way and giving them proper depth, like we kind of saw with the Marvels movie. But if there's one problem that we would like to shed more light on, and shout out to film theorists who actually shed some light on this already, it's the fact that the MCU is primarily now focused on one person, and that one person is Kevin Feige. Now, let's not rewrite history here. Kevin Feige has done a phenomenal job with the MCU. Now, if we remember, once upon a time in the darker days of Marvel Studios, Feige was a consultant from Marvel Studios to movie studios who dared to adapt a Marvel comic. As someone who basically is a Marvel comic savant, Feige used to suggest that these studios stay close to the source material and pick the right kind of Marvel stories, but nobody listened. It wasn't until he got the gig at the head of Marvel Studios, and when the first Iron Man movie came along, that Feige actually had creative control of the Marvel IP, and he did wonders with it, giving us 15 years of incredible content and impeccable management. Thanks to the success, Feige became the head of Marvel, not just the movie studios. This includes gaming, comics, movies, and even merch production. Kevin Feige sits at the head of it all. He controls the narrative of every single movie, comics, and games of every single Marvel product that comes out. While that's maybe less so for gaming and comics, it is definitely very true for the movie. Everything in the MCU has to be Kevin Feige approved. But while that worked during the small days of the MCU, in Marvel Cinematic Planet, if you will, it's definitely not going to work now if you ask me. But it's no longer really the MCU. It's kind of like the MCM, right? The Marvel Cinematic Multiverse. So it's obvious that the Kevin Feige-centric approach isn't going to cut it. Kevin's stern and strict emphasis on sticking to his narratives is severely hurting the organization right now. There have been several directors that have complained that they didn't have creative control when it came to their movies. Scott Derrickson, who directed the first Doctor Strange movie, had to leave because of creative differences. We saw several scenes from Thor: Love and Thunder that were cut from the movie, like the scene involving Thor and Zeus having a really deep conversation that would have given the movie even more depth and added to the seriousness that the fans wanted in the theme. But that version of Zeus was removed because the studio, Kevin Feige, decided to go in another direction. It was even reported that the director of the Marvels, Nia DaCosta, wanted to lean heavier into the comic book aspect of the movie, but Kevin Feige didn't want to go in that direction. So it's pretty clear that Kevin Feige is not letting the directors run with their ideas, right? And he is constantly suppressing these new stories. I don't know if it's PTSD from when he didn't have creative control, but it kind of feels like he's becoming something that he hated. Marvel movies used to be an event, but now it just feels like we have one every single day, right? So it's hard to keep things fresh and then control the quality of the narrative with one person calling the shots. Things can get bad when you don't allow new voices to make significant appearances, especially if those significances include giving characters more depth. Now, speaking of appearances, Keepin It Comic does have a new merch store, and I think it's pretty good. I mean, to be fair, I'm not necessarily an expert on clothes or anything, but I do wear clothes from time to time. Yep, I am wearing pants today. And speaking of pants, that's one of the things that you can get on the Keepin It Comic merch store. They're stylish, fashionable, and affordable. This is also one way that you can help to support the channel, which will go a long way to improving the quality of content that we're able to provide here on Keepin It Comic. So go get some merch, and remember guys, we appreciate it. Now back to the video. Another issue is the amount of hush that we have right now in the MCU. Information isn't allowed to circulate amongst the writers and the people making those projects. And a team that's working on one Marvel project doesn't have enough information on another project that has a shared character. This creates an issue where characters look one way in a project and then looks another in the next. There's no consistency and everything feels disjointed. We saw that in Nick Fury from his transition from Secret Invasion to the Marvels. It happened to Wanda in WandaVision and the Multiverse of Madness, all because Feige isn't properly sharing information between the writers. Now, I do understand that this is probably a strategy, right, to mitigate leaks, and to prevent sensitive information from coming out, but at what cost, right? This has led to some serious issues with MCU continuity. So I think it's best if Feige takes a step back and starts to segment the MCU into different units and puts trusted people with promising and fresh ideas in charge of those units. This is what James Gunn was supposed to be in the MCU. He was going to be in charge of the space-related section of things, except that did not work out so well for other reasons. I think it would make sense to have someone in charge of the space-themed stories like the Guardians of the Galaxy or the Marvels, have someone else in charge of the magical/supernatural stories like Doctor Strange and WandaVision, and then have someone else for street-level stories like Daredevil and an Echo. And then make sure that sufficient information is being passed around in the event any character is crossing over. Now, I understand that that's kind of already being done here with the Marvel Spotlight that's focused on street-level stories where audiences don't have to bother about the main continuity, and that's honestly where the solution lies with the whole rebooting thing, but more on that in a second. So far, everything I've been saying has just been addressing what's causing the talks of this MCU reboot. And to be fair, this is only supposed to be a soft reboot, not a complete reset. So really quickly, as it pertains to the soft reboot, this is kind of what's been circling around there in terms of what it could mean for the MCU. There's a quote from Kevin Feige sort of implying that Secret Wars will serve as a soft reboot in which they can prune everything that's not working and keep what is working, or bring back people you thought were gone forever. So for instance, it could mean bringing back characters like Tony, Steve, T'Challa, even Black Widow that might be played by new people, or the OG Avengers cast. We'll ultimately just have to see. The soft reboot will also be more involved with the SSU or the Sony Spider-Man universe. So there could be things, I guess, that comes in line with like maybe Madam Web being more included because of course of Tom Holland. And then we could even see things like Miles Morales, but sort of kind of like trimming the fat is basically, I think, one of the quotes that Kevin Feige had out there about sort of kind of, probably getting rid of some of the characters too, right? So this soft reboot will mean that they'll kind of employ a new creative team and direction in a way, but they'll still retain the continuity from previous material. The best way I can describe it is something like Star Wars with the whole J.J. Abrams spin on things, and that's kind of all slated to happen after Avengers Secret Wars. Much like how the Secret Wars event of the comics sort of changed everything, giving us a universe where the best and the preferred heroes by fans were allowed to keep going, and everyone that we didn't like was removed. I suspect that that's probably what's going to happen here in the MCU. Honestly, the way I see it, that is, there's a potential chance that this could ultimately end up being a waste in the MCU long term, but could satisfy some fans in the short term who want to see those heroes that were gone that they want to have back, like Iron Man, Cap. It's just gotta not be cheesy in the way that they do it, right? But I still think ultimately that the multiverse prevents such a phenomenal opportunity for them. I can guarantee that a couple of the projects that they have slated don't take advantage of the magic that the multiverse can be. There are still so many amazing stories that they could tell. Marvel having the multiverse end in Secret Wars and then starting the process of phases again is severely going to hurt a lot of things, because in a nutshell, the whole connective storytelling is really not necessarily working in all aspects. Right now, with the vast amount of projects, the central narrative is all over the place, and that's bound to happen if the Multiverse Saga ends. It also means that each individual series doesn't get judged on its own individual merits, but rather as a part of a larger whole. Now, let's be honest, you don't really see the Marvels as just the Marvels, right? You kind of see it as a movie that is a prequel to the Avengers. And for me to understand a lot of things that are going on in there, I have to see a fair amount of MCU content prior to that. To understand the Marvels, I need to have seen WandaVision, Miss Marvel, Secret Invasion, and Captain Marvel 1. I mean, the movie is supposed to be an enjoyable experience. And what fans are complaining about is that they have to do homework before the movie, and then they also have to do homework after the movie's done, which of course is just exhausting to fans, and a lot of people are just ultimately sick of it. And in the Multiverse Saga means that they'll have to have characters address whatever big cataclysm happened during Secret Wars, just like how it had to be done with Avengers Endgame, where everyone had to talk about the blip and be all sad about that, right? So what should the MCU do? Well, part of it is what we mentioned earlier, with segmenting the MCU and giving new creative hands to handle things while Kevin takes a step back and he oversees. But that's just one half of the equation. I think the other solution is just letting the multiverse continue after Secret Wars. As we mentioned, the main problem of why the MCU isn't doing too well is in central narrative being moved by Kevin Feige through the phases. Well, that's good because connective storytelling is tight, right? But it also creates a problem we've listed of rebuilding momentum and projects not being judged on their own individual merit. Right now, I think what Marvel Studios needs to do is use the multiverse to the fullest and forget about putting everything in phases, because audiences audiences are kind of just gonna get a little tired of it. What they need is kind of like another section of the MCU, kind of like DC does. I can't believe I'm actually saying that, but you know, like Matt Reeves, the Batman, and Joaquin Phoenix's Joker have nothing to do with the main DC continuity. Well, we need something like that in the MCU stories that have nothing to do with the pre-existing narrative per se. Stories that I can just enjoy without any homework or caring about anything else. That's kind of the soft reboot that the MCU needs, in my personal opinion. And use it of stories separate from the main MCU continuity, just like What If was supposed to be, except What If is sort of retelling stories that we already knew. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't do connective storytelling, but adding sort of like another world, or maybe having some factions being in their separate universe, I think would work wonders. If a story or a character does well, he or she can then get grafted into the main continuity, maybe forever, maybe even just for a short period of time. This means that the MCU would then continue its Multiverse Saga rather than ending it after Secret Wars. Even right now, they can put a lot of movies in sort of like this other section or other world, if you want to call it. It would fill a lot of pieces in the MCU storyline. For example, if the Eternals were to be in an Elseworld, we wouldn't have to worry about them showing up in the Avengers or worry about how the Celestials fit into all of this. Same thing for a character like Moonlight. He could just be chilling in his own corner of the multiverse, not bothering anyone, and we don't have to worry about him showing up in more MCU projects. And it would explain why no one is talking about the giant Celestial that is sticking out in Earth, or the fact that the night sky constantly changed at one time thanks to Khonshu's meddling with it. This will help fix the problem of too many characters. We'll just have more individualized stories about them, maybe stories about the X-Men, Fantastic Four, or even fan favorite characters like Sentry or whoever else that you probably want to see in the MCU. Audience can judge a lot of these movies on their own merit rather than as a full-on MCU project. Those same factions could have crossover events, and then after that, they go back to their own universe without disrupting the amazing story that they have, just like how James Gunn did with the Guardians of the Galaxy. This way, fans can also appreciate and also get the satisfaction of seeing their favorite team-ups. Also, it helped meet the Disney Plus demand for superhero content. I mean, one of the reasons why we have so many MCU projects is because of Disney Plus. Then elsewhere, you can make as many Disney Plus projects that you want that don't hurt the MCU itself. And of course, like I said, if it does well, if fans really like it, then you can always find a way to graft them into the main continuity, because you can then say they were in another multiverse, right? In my opinion, I think this is something that would work. So in a nutshell, segment the MCU into units. Give the units heads sufficient information and creative control. Don't end the Multiverse Saga after Secret Wars, but rather create a world where they can live separately. They can do, the X-Men can do their own thing, Fantastic Four can do their own thing, and then you can have these crossover events that can bring them together, and it doesn't interrupt with the main continuity of the story that you're trying to keep. Let me know what you think about the MCU here getting a reboot. Do you think it should be done, or do you think that the Multiverse Saga should continue on after Avengers Secret Wars, just to sort of kind of introduce these new individualized stories? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button here. Also, notification bell so you know when the videos do go live. Check out our merch store that is also down below. And as always, guys, thanks so much for kicking it with Keepin It Comic.